Welcome to Crisis and Hope, YU Voices. Crisis and Hope is a project of the Center for Israel Studies, the Rabbi Arthur Schneier Program for International Affairs, the Bernard Revel Graduate School of Jewish Studies, and Judaic Studies at YU, Madei HaYahadut. My name is Ronnie Perelis, Professor of Jewish History at Yeshiva University, and today I welcome you to La Santa Esther, Esther among the Crypto Jews of the Americas, with Professor Emily Colbert Cairns. When we began this series in June, we wanted to create a forum that would go beyond the headlines and tweets and talking points that often pass for political and cultural discourse. We wanted a space for nuance, depth, and perspective. We believe that the past can inform and bring light to the present and even give us hope in moments of confusion and despair. And for that reason, I'm so honored to invite all of you here today with our special guest, Professor Emily Colbert Cairns, who is an associate professor of Spanish at Salve Regina University in Rhode Island. She specializes in gender and converso and crypto Jewish identity in the early modern period. Her book, which this talk is an outgrowth of, is called Esther in Early Modern Iberia and the Sephardic Diaspora, Queen of the Conversas, by Palgrave in 2017. She spent the fall of 2019 conducting research in the Archivo de la Diputación de Sevilla in Seville, Spain, in support of her current book project, which sounds incredibly fascinating and complex, which is on breastfeeding practices in the early modern world. And I want to give a shout out to our friends at the Strauss Center, who put together this fascinating collection of essays on Esther, and Professor Colbert is in this, and in this collection. So if you see this is making the rounds. And I want to thank Stu Halpern for putting this together and for including Emily. So we have a voice from the Sephardic diaspora here as well in this collection, and really does good work in expanding what we mean by America. So often we hear America and we think United States. But if you leave the United States, you know that America is a very, very big place. It starts in the Arctic and goes all the way to Tierra del Fuego in the south, and it's an expansive notion. And so I'm happy that with this essay, this expands the canon of what we understand and what we think about as America. And I want to say one thing before we start, which is if you have questions along the way, I know that Professor Colbert will have, we'll definitely have space to engage questions, but if you have questions, put them into the chat, all right? And then I'll be able to moderate and send them to her, but okay. And I wanna welcome also, we have some special guests. We have students from Professor Colbert's class, so that's really wonderful. Professor Colbert's grandparents, that's really great. My colleague and dear friend, Jess Olson is here, and I know I'm missing people, and I hope I will catch them later. Okay, so without any further ado, please, Professor Colbert.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Ronnie, for inviting me here today, and to all of the students who are here from both colleges. It's really exciting. And I'm really looking forward to sharing some research that I've conducted over the past number of years, and hoping also to add some new ideas to how you think about Purim and its heroine. And with that, I'm going to share some images on my screen. And please do, if you have questions, I'm really happy to discuss. Okay, so here we go. La Santa Esther, Esther among the Crypto Jews of the Americas, and that is my book cover on the bottom. Like so many Jewish girls at age 8, I dressed up as Queen Esther for Purim. Beautiful and heroic, she was the obvious choice, just edging out of the Hamantashen outfit I was sporting the year before. Even at that young age, thanks to our Sunday morning classes, we all knew that she saved the Jewish people. Who wouldn't want to be like Esther? Esther has remained an inspiring figure to me today, And while a minor figure for mainstream Jews and Christians, her cameo role at Purim is a mere hint at the far richer and more prominent place she has held for marginalized Jewish women over many centuries. A hopeful figure at times of mortal danger, the same women who passed furtive notes inscribed on avocado and banana skins while held by the Inquisition made practices to venerate her. And I'll be discussing, I'm going to be discussing two sets of texts from my book. And the second set actually is about two Inquisition trial of the Carvajal sisters. And they actually did pass notes. And I have some images to show you that they did write on the skins of avocado and banana. My recent book that you can see, Esther in Early Modern Iberia and the Sephardic Diaspora, tells the story of Esther in both inquisitorial Iberia and throughout the Sephardic Diaspora in this period, roughly 1500s to 1700s. And so, in other words, I'm exploring texts that were produced from both Christian and Jewish perspectives. And when I say Iberia, I mean Spain and Portugal. So I'm looking at how Esther functioned among these two different religious communities. I focus on these various Esther texts through a gendered lens, and I explore the idea of the feminization of impurity in an Iberian context. Women were considered the bearers, literally, of impurity through childbirth. The impure blood, i.e. Jewish and Muslim, were passed down to their children. At the same time, women's bodies, regardless of their religious identity, preserve their husbands' and families' honor by being pure. And when Ronnie mentioned my new project is about breast milk, that's the next iteration thinking about impurity that I'm starting to look at. So today I'm going to focus on two sets of texts, the 16th century tapestry series, Esther en los Huertos, that's held within the cathedral in Zaragoza, Spain. And I visited these tapestries. I'm going to show you images 2 summers ago, and it was I guess 3 summers ago now, and it was really awesome. The tapestries reflect a Christian perspective. I also work with the original and unpublished Inquisition trials of Isabel and Leonor de Carvajal, housed in Berkeley, California, to explore the Jewish perspective. These crypto or secret Judaizers perished in their second inquisitorial trial in New Spain in 1595 to 96. And I chose these two sets of texts because I have visual components that I can share with you. And they reflect this hybrid lens that is central in my book. They mix elements of Christianity and Judaism. As we'll see in a moment, the crypto Jews, the secret Jews, lived publicly as Catholics and privately as Jews. And so practices from both religions really impacted their daily lives. Okay, so for this group, I don't need to recap the Esther story. And I shared with some of my students the story briefly in class. But I did want to just take a moment and to ask you to think about how you interact with the story of Purim, how you were taught it, and if anybody just wanted to share before I continue, any ideas or things that you did as a kid. I just thought it could be a nice way of beginning. Or if you want to save it to later, we can do that too. But just wanted to give a space for anybody who celebrates Purim.
Can I say?
Sure.
Does anyone here love Purim more than any other holiday? Is this their favorite holiday for anybody? You can raise your hand. You don't have to justify it. I'm just curious.
There's a couple.
One person said the least favorite. That's also a reaction. It's certainly a reaction that has a long historical pedigree. Yes, for sure. All right.
Okay. Do your kids like it?
Yes. Yes.
And okay. So for me, it was a story where I celebrated a young, beautiful queen. And that was basically it. Esther won a beauty contest, and when asked not to reveal her background in order to save the Jews, I accepted this fact. The idea of hiding one's identity this and that comes to become a crucial aspect for Jewish conversos really resonated with me later. And this is what I argue makes her queen of the conversos. The idea that you have to hide your identity and then later potentially reveal it or change it became something that I grappled with and engaged with as an adult. So why is it relevant to a Jews in Latin America course that you're taking this idea of the role of that Esther had for Christian communities? Well, there was a real back and forth between Spain and the New World in this period. And we're going to see that exemplified in the Carvajals in just a moment. They were born in Portugal, they left from Spain, they moved to the New World. So there was this constant back and forth between all of the colonial Sephardic Jews and the New World. And they lived really mixed lives. They lived in a majority Spanish context, but and would have been exposed to the environment of the tapestries that I'm about to talk about. Okay, so text number 1. In this story of Jewish triumph, why was the Esther story retold by Christians in the tapestries? The story of Esther was used to construct a narrative of a strong empire in 16th century Spain. And we're talking about the Spanish colonial period at its height. They retell the Esther story and uphold the idea that she is a beautiful heroine, but crucially, she is not a transgressive underdog. Instead, she upholds contemporary norms of gendered and female behavior. And if you look at this image here, this is Zaragoza, Spain. It's a really beautiful city. And the stunning tapestries were actually during the period that I'm researching in the 16th century, 1500s, were displayed on the outside of this cathedral's walls every Holy Week, which happens in mid-April. It's the last week of Lent, and it would happen over 500 years. So they would be displayed every year, these huge tapestries. And as you can see in the image on the left, the Holy Week celebrations were really important. The whole town came out, and they still do to this day. They lasted for about a week. People danced in the streets. There was elaborate parades. And the tapestries were exposed to the elements in this architecturally stunning central plaza of Zaragoza, which remains to this day the epicenter of public discourse. People, rich and poor, would have been out throughout the week celebrating in mass. And there would have been birds flying around, people hustling. You get the idea. It was a really dynamic moment. So I'm going to go on to the first tapestry. So this tapestry, and you can kind of see the size of it from the cords at the bottom. It's a 3-series panel, and they're really, really large. So the figures that you're seeing are really life-size. The tapestry served as a Bible for the majority illiterate population. It's noteworthy that the size of the figures appear as life-size. So the public, when they were hung on the cathedral walls, would have been really experiencing this as their own size. Today, visitors can see these panels and they in the museum held in the cathedral, and I definitely recommend a visit. In the first scene, the king, who you can see on the left, is in pride of place, eating an opulent meal and surrounded by members of the court. So here's the king. He has numerous servants around him. They're each serving a particular function. There's wine bearers, there's meat carvers. It's a feast. And the king is at the height of his power. As you can see, he has a commanding gesture. He's holding a scepter in his hand. He's pointing to the different spices. And there's an emphasis in this panel on the king's majesty. He must demonstrate the vastness and the power of his empire. On the right side, you can see on the right side of this panel, oops, sorry, I'm gonna go back one. On the very right, you can see Vashti on the bottom. And actually they're labeled, all of these figures are labeled with this beautiful golden thread. And Vashti was banished, and it shows the bitter fate of those who do not comply with his rule. So this is panel number 1. Panel number 2, these tapestries were crafted in Belgium. It was also part of the Spanish Empire. So when we talk about the Spanish Empire at its height, it's all over the world, the New World, Europe. And we can see the Dutch architecture if you look at the very top of this panel, the blue colors that were very commonly found. And Esther appears for the first time in the very bottom in the central panel. And I have a detail here, you can see her. The emphasis is on her as a selection of a beautiful queen, and she's a beautiful blonde queen. She calls to mind the contemporary historical is Queen Isabel of Spain, who expelled the Jewish people and was celebrated also for upholding womanly virtues. Isabel, as a strong queen, helped explains the appeal of the Esther figure for Christians at this time. And I'm just going to move. This is the final panel. And it's meant to be read from left to right, and it is the climax of the Esther story. It depicts her approaching the king in an attempt to save her people. She prepares to go to the king with she prepares to go to the king with the help of her courtesans, as you can see, and it is critical what's omitted. The fast of Esther. The fast of Esther is going to become something really important for the Carvajal family. But here, what you have is feasting and bounty. It's important that Esther is featured below Asueros, and you can see she's standing below him, showing her obedience, which is an important theme in this work. This moment is revealing because Esther is presented undeniably not as a strident protagonist, but demure and clearly inferior, literally a supplicant at his feet. Even though the story is about the central action of the figure, the most important amount of space is given to the king in his redolent splendor. The message is clear: the king is a source of power. So the tapestries create a living narrative between today and 500 years ago in Zaragoza. The aspects of everyday life are presented to allow the audience to see their own personal connections with the main biblical text. They were viewed by men and women, clergy, elite, and common people alike. For common people, they were a type of spiritual advisor. For the elite, they were aspirational, as well as a showpiece crafted over many months with gold and silk thread. They were highly sought after in a pan-European collection that were intended to wow the viewer. And if you find yourself in Spain today, I definitely recommend a visit to Zaragoza and to the Museum del Liceo. So I'd like to just now move to the second set of texts, and this is going to show the Jewish perspective at the same period. And the Carvajal women would have lived within this context where they could have been exposed to tapestries like this one. So the Carvajal sisters, as seen in the 1596 Inquisition trial, and here we have on the right, Isabel de Carvajal in front of inquisitors. Her body is stripped, half naked. She's very vulnerable. Queen, and on the right side, on the left side of the screen, you can see the notes actually that the sisters passed between themselves on the avocado skins, and these were kept as evidence by the inquisitors. So Esther stood out for these women as for Isabel and Leonor de Carvajal, two sisters who lived public lives as Catholics and private lives as Jewish conversos with a large network of family and friends. They were imprisoned twice by the Inquisition and ultimately killed in an auto de fe after the second trial. And they would pass these notes back and to each other, back and forth, on what they had accessible. So the banana peels and avocado skins. Just to define my terms for a moment, when I say converso, it's a converted.
Sorry,
Oh,
are we seeing an avocado skin there? Or is that just because it looks just like a paper?
These were the notes that they kind of stuck on them. I think.
Okay. They had something that would hide them in that, right? That's how they passed the notes in the prison.
Yeah, but then they would also, from other accounts, they would write actually on the skins as well. But this would be a way of sticking them. Yeah, and then and we found that the inquisitors would actually provide them with with writing implements because they were able to get information if they wrote to each other. So that was kind of no thanks. So conversos, a converso is a converted Jew to Catholicism. right? And we're talking about dates like 1391, when the first Jews were converted. And so we have normative Jews and converted Jews now conversely living side by side, and the idea of true and false converts. And then, of course, 1492, bringing the expulsion, and normative practicing Jews were no longer allowed in Spain. Flexibility was crucial to the Carvajal survival and practice in a world that was both hybrid and dramatically unaccommodating. Esther's adaptable not only for survival, but ultimately for success. For these Carvajal sisters who lived double lives as public Christians and private Jews, Esther, who passed in the majority Persian society, became queen, while ultimately keeping her religious identity secret, deeply resonated with them. And we can read in her trial how they negotiated these two identities within the home. Before I read from the trial, I just wanted to point out some images from this is the actual full trial from the Carvajal. This is from Isabel de Carvajal's trial. Her sister had her own. It's many pages, over 500 pages. It's a really complete trial, except for the odd wormhole. There's actually wormholes you can see in them now, and it's leather bound and beautiful and inscribed, and it's an interesting document that's lasted for over so many years. And this is the cover page opened. Okay, so this is a quote that I've translated. There was an altar in the main living room of the house that had some images that she used to trick those who entered. Sometimes she would kneel in front of the images to make it seem to the household that she was Spanish, i.e., practicing Catholicism. And my mother had a rosary that she would hold in her hands and bring to Mass, although she would never pray with it, nor would she entrust herself to Jesus Christ or his Blessed Mother, but instead to appear in jest or to appear that she was practicing Catholicism. I reimagine the Carvajal sisters as leaders of their faith. Most historians have been primarily interested in the brother, Luis de Carvajal, who calls himself a martyr in his second inquisitorial trial and in his autobiography authored in prison. I focus instead on these women as central purveyors of the crypto-Jewish faith in their family and within their crypto-Jewish community. And crypto-Jewish refers to those who secretly practiced Judaism and publicly practiced Catholicism. They were baptized, and hence why they were subject to the Inquisition. Where Judaism is a patriarchal religion, I argue that crypto-Judaism was matriarchal. Men were absent and often away for long periods of time. The only people entrusted with the faith for the next generation became women. Due to an absence of a stable patriarchy, and many engaged in trade. We're talking about the Sephardic Diaspora that went to Angola and Africa and Northern Europe and Spain and the New World. Due to the absence of men being there, just like for those Sephardic Jews who lived in Newport, where I live and where my students live right now, the Sephardic diaspora encouraged a dominant matriarchy. And these opportunities for matriarchy and the Carvajal's accommodation to inquisitorial persecution shaped the sisters' fervent Judaizing. And you can see here the first page of her trial of Doña Isabel de Carvajal. You can see what she was accused of on the left. She was a relapsed Judaizer, relapsa judaizante, because she already had another trial where she had to reform and was given an opportunity, but didn't sufficiently. So this is from the trial. And then as we continue reading, there's a lot of other instances in the trial that show how these women lived a hybrid faith. In the next passage, they would show how they attended church on a regular basis to feign allegiance to the Republic of Spaniards. So they said the Carvajals who had taken the sacraments of the Mother Church without any feeling, and although she didn't make fun of them and confess that she took communion, she did so only to obey the rules, because she did not believe in Jesus Christ as the author of the sacraments, nor did she believe him to be God. And the altar that they had in their house, it was only there to appear as Spanish subjects and not to be discovered, not because they truly believed in the law of Jesus Christ. Esther became the patron saint of crypto-Judaism. Like the role that the Virgin Mary held for Christians, Esther provided hope and was considered a model and heroine for crypto-Jews. She was a female savior that could release the crypto-Jewish populace from their oppression. Esther was keenly significant because crypto-Jews were raised as public Catholics and private Jews. They embodied in their everyday practice and lives a dual and plural faith. And the idea of hiding something to then later reveal. As we have seen, crypto Judaism is a hybrid faith that cannot be divorced into its constituent Catholic and Jewish influences. Figures such as Esther had power precisely because they resonated within both faiths. For the Carvajal women, Esther became Saint Esther in their private letters, and she was especially important because of the centrality of the cult of Mary within the Catholic faith at this time. And so here in this quote from the trial, also we can see the role of Esther. Doña Isabel upheld the fast in contemplation of Queen Esther. In all 3 days, she had not eaten an egg, and on Saturday, Doña Isabel did not fast because it was a holiday. And then she began to fast on Sunday at midday, and then she would continue. It said Doña Isabel also bought a ciliary or a discipline and would hit herself every day and then fast to observe the law of Moses. She confessed that she had not done as much penitence as she had wanted to do to health concerns and promised to not do less than she had promised God. This this penitentiary context, the self-flagellation, the use of hair shirts, which are these bristly shirts that made people think of their faith, and fasting also reveals a more Catholic practice, and they contrast with the overt practices of normative Judaism because they were not visible. One could not easily celebrate Purim with a feast and a party or a festival, but interior practices such as the fast of Esther were primary. In this way, the body is a female-controlled space that stood out in its defiance of patriarchal Catholic order. Unlike the tapestries that left out the fast of Esther and instead showed the many celebratory banquets, here the fast of Esther stands out as a centrally important practice. For women like the Carvajal sisters, Esther became the head of a new type of religiosity, a matriarchal, female-led practice within their homes and using their own bodies. They bled for her with hair shirts, they fasted for her, but above all, they looked for her guidance at a time when more and more of their endangered cultural heritage was in their hands. And just as a way of concluding, this is the map that I kind of think of from my book, from my work, and think of as the Sephardic Diaspora. And I look at different texts. We just looked at the Carvajal sisters in New Spain on the left. We looked at the tapestries that were created in Flanders, in more Northern Europe. In my book, I look at a poem that took place in Amsterdam, was written in Amsterdam, other things that were written in Spain. And so as you can see, the Sephardic diaspora is really widespread. Esther is a cultural chameleon who survived by passing and triumphed by coming out. In this way, she seems a more modern figure than one would expect, as does her surprisingly global context in the Jewish diaspora. She's an early modern globetrotter and border transgressor. And Sephardic identity exists beyond geographical boundaries and contests the pure physical boundaries of a national identity. These people were mobile and global. They also had multiple loyalties. They were Jewish and Christian, and their practices became mixed because they lived double lives. The Esther story continues to be a crucial story, for better, for worse, if you love it or hate it, for Jewish people today. Every year, many little girls, and I just wanted to end, this is a picture of me dressed up as Queen Esther, don their Esther costumes. Like the early modern women who saw public models of royalty in Isabel la Católica and Catholic models of saints, nuns, and the Virgin Mary, Esther was their alternative, their Jewish queen and heroine that they aspired to be like, both in her physical beauty and in her interior strength. Like Esther, they aspire to resist adversity, survive, and flourish. And so with that, I thank you for inviting me. I'd love to have a discussion and go over any questions and comments. And so, yeah, thank you.
Thank you for this tour, this really impressive tour here we've had. And I want to hear some questions. I see Sam Gelman has his hand up. Sam, you want to?
Yeah, hi.
Sure.
Thank you very much for the talk. I'm a little curious about if there are any other examples you have of crypto Jews adopting Christian themes or practices in their Jewish faith, similar to the self-hitting that you mentioned at the end of the talk. Are there any other examples of those types of things among crypto Jews?
Yeah, I mean, they lived their lives. So many of the crypto Jews only knew they had a Jewish background when they were a bar bat mitzvah age, so, or even later, so sometimes even 14 years old, because they had to kind of keep the faith hidden, and they didn't want their kids to reveal something that they shouldn't. And so they came to it later. So there was a lot of practices that they they lived as Catholics before. So I think their religious identity was definitely shaped. I thought about it mostly in terms of the fasting, just being in this context where they would have rosaries, they would have altars, they would know what to do with them. And they would also have images. So another example is there was images of Queen Esther, of Saint Esther, which is not something that you see in Judaism at all, but within the crypto-Jewish practice, they would have paintings of Queen Esther, and they would venerate that in a Catholic way, in the same way that the Virgin Mary was venerated, or in Mexico later we see the Virgen de Guadalupe start to be venerated also. Yeah, I don't know, Ronnie, if you have things that you've seen too.
We read, yeah, I'm not muted. We read the Carvajal autobiography, and we also read the case of Las Blancas, Blanca Rivera, that's dealt with in Kagan's book, in this book. For those of you who are interested, it's a great book, great collection of inquisitorial narratives. And students, can you remember some of we discussed a lot of these kind of apparently very Christianized Jewish things, right? It was kind of this weird, who'd like to, yeah, I think Erica, yeah, you want to, please?
I don't have a question, more of just a comment.
But about this, I saw you put a question. I want to get to that. That was a really good question about the illustration.
Yeah, I do have that question, but I also have a comment.
Okay, about the Christianization stuff?
More just about the matriarchy.
Okay, so hold on to it because I want to talk about that too. Anyone remember anything, Juliet?
I thought that when they whipped the Christ figure, that was very Christian, with like kind of putting the suffering back on them.
Right. We talked about that in detail. Blanca and her daughters, they had this practice of taking out a little cross, a crucifix with Jesus on it, and like whipping it and beating it. Which, we looked at some images of Christ in the Passion, where you revere. What do you revere? You revere the suffering of God and like the pain, and especially in Spanish and South American churches, it's very gory. There's a lot of blood. There's a lot of wounds. It's like so there's kind of an absorption of a lot of those things. But in the case of Carvajal, it's himself, and this is something we didn't talk about so much in the class, but he was Luis de Carvajal was very textual. He was, he had good Latin and was very textually focused. So something that he was involved with was taking Christian scholarly works, mostly Christian interpretations and commentaries on the Pentateuch, right, on the Chumash, and extracting from that all sorts of Jewish content. He was a master at that sort of poaching, sort of kind of taking something. So he discovered there a discussion of Maimonides' 13 Principles of Faith. How in the world would he ever, right? Would he ever get that? from living in a Catholic world where Jewish books were banned, right? Or you get access to midrashim that would be quoted by this Christian author to critique them, to show, oh, the rabbis are so foolish. Look how wrong Rashi is here. Look how wrong the midrash is here. But he's able to then Judaize it and use it for his own Judaism, which was one of his more audacious sort of things to do. But yeah, I mean the affliction of the cross. There's a really weird case of someone in northern Mexico. I'm forgetting the name. Emily, you may remember they do this weird sort of, instead of doing circumcision of the flesh in the normal way, which is dangerous for all sorts of reasons, but this guy also only had daughters, and he would like cut a tiny piece of skin off their shoulders as like a sacrifice, but it was seen as kind of almost like a circumcision. It was this very bizarre. I mean, they were very isolated. This was like a very isolated family. They weren't living in a big community of people who, you know, might have said, oh, what in the world are you doing? He just was doing his best to kind of imagine what would be the right. I mean, it's pretty weird stuff. But again, that's an absorption of the sort of self-flagellation, and which isn't a real feature certainly not in Sephardic culture at the time, that they would have absorbed from their Jewish past. I mean, maybe, but it's not a prominent feature of how Jews practiced their religion. So this is clearly saying they're absorbing, and then, you know, as the Inquisition says, you know, Judaizing it, right, making it Jewish. Erica had a question. Or you want to ask the question about the illustrations, or whichever one you want to ask? You're free to ask whatever you want.
Well, I have one question and then one comment.
Sure. Good.
The question is, I know that everything was recorded when prisoners would have an assembly. Were there also like painters or sketch artists that would like draw the scenes that were going on? And was that specific picture that you showed us of Isabel Carvajal, was that an example, or is that something that was made years ago?
You know, that's a good, I'm not entirely sure that it was not included in the trial documents. The trial documents don't have any images. There's meticulous comments, like you said, about things being recorded, things that they said. And I didn't say this earlier, but the trial documents have not just their testimony, but the testimony of all the other people in their family, things that they were accused of. And that's how the book gets so big. But in terms of, there was definitely a scribe. I think the image was created later. But I'm not positive of when it was. But the scribe definitely had a prominent role in recording her testimony. And I do have an image of her own signature of Isabel. So she was also literate. I can show you. I can pull that up. I actually have it on a different slide. So she was literate, and she, you know, her religious practice was different than Luis, her brother, and it was more bodily focused, but there was also a lot of songs that she transmitted with her sisters and sang, and in Hebrew and in Spanish, and that they taught to other members of their family. So they were also very learned individuals, but their religiosity did happen more bodily. But I'll pull up I'll share this.
As you do that, Erica, I'll say that picture that Emily used, that's a great one. The picture that Emily used is from in the 19th century. Ooh, let's see.
Oh, this is the wrong, sorry, this is not the right one. This is from Felipe Godinez's signature, but I do have it. I'll look for it. Okay. I can check. But anyway, you can do
say that image, right? I mean, the scribes, they didn't have, you know, illustrations, but they did have, you know, like Emily said, very, very minute descriptions, even sometimes describing the screams during torture. I mean, some of the stuff is really, really, really kind of crazy, the amount that they'll record. But that picture comes from I believe mid 19th century, like 1850s, 1860s Mexican book that when, we'll learn about this a little bit later in the semester, but almost all South American countries gain independence from Spain in the 1820s, right? They have wars of independence in all these countries to kick out the Spanish everywhere except for Cuba and Puerto Rico. And one of the first things they do when they kick out the Spanish is dismantle the Inquisition, which was still functioning in the 1820s, believe it or not. It's kind of amazing to think about. Yeah. And then one of the things that a lot of Mexican historians did was turn to colonial history to try to understand where they are at. Just like we do today, we try to understand our situation by looking at the past, and for a lot of them were very anti-church. Even though they were Catholic, they were very upset and critical of the church and its excesses and corruption. So the Inquisition was a great place to go to critique the Spanish, which you hate, and to critique the church that you hate. And so they produced these books, which were historically a little bit propagandist. And that's why they use those very, very evocative pictures of people in torture and in very terrible situations. And but it did, that scene is not completely exaggerated, like many others. But yeah, that's a little bit about that sort of work that.
And so much of their testimony too, it's going through the scribes' own writing, them writing it down. It's not their own voice 100% being recorded. And then you think too about the torture that you're seeing with that, that image, and that everything is being modified also by what they were under, extreme duress. And
right. And that leads to the role of the historian, eavesdropping on this, right? Figure it all out.
Yeah.
And then thank you for that. I also had just a thought that popped into my head that I see a really strong correlation, obviously, between Esther and these women who are continuing Jewish life or Jewish existence for Sephardim. But I also see specifically a correlation to the women of Shemot when they were enslaved in Egypt, and the men were always out in the fields, and they were, they had a very pessimistic mindset, but it was the women who were like, no, we need to continue, we need to do at least some Jewish stuff. We need to at least, we need to continue to populate and all. And I just see that very clearly, especially with Las Blancas and the aunt who was the one who, brought Judaism into their lives. So yeah, that's just another correlation that I saw. Not only Esther, but you also have these women before who were enslaved. And yeah.
Yeah, Rach, thank you. Yeah, there's a lot to think about there. Rachel Goodman, hi.
Hi, thank you for having me. I'm not in this course, but I did have a question. There was some testimony where a child was talking about her mother's actions, and there was an altar in the living room or something like that. So I just was really interested in the child giving testimony on his or her mom. Was she brought in, the child brought in willingly, or was it like they dragged? I don't know. Like how did that happen?
Yeah, no, thank you. It was actually, so that was actually Isabel's testimony, and she was an adult at that point, but she is testifying, as you said, with against her mother. And it was really common. They brought in, the whole family was part of, was all brought on trial in the second inquisitorial trial. Luis, there was more sisters, there was friends who were part of their crypto-Jewish community in New Spain. They were all brought up on charges at the same time. And so they all testified against each other. And the testimony from one that incriminated somebody else would then be included in somebody else's trial. In terms of like actual children, there were children at this time. I didn't see any of the children actually, like, kids at that time testifying against anybody or brought up on charges. But we know there were kids because Isabel and her sister taught them songs and were kind of the teachers. But yeah, the whole document is riddled with comments, sister about sister and mother, children. And yeah, it's
Yeah, pretty gruesome.
Yeah.
But that's really interesting. I didn't realize that's her as an adult.
Yeah.
And it's like you said, Emily, right? It's one of the reasons why you don't tell you don't tell a little kid about this secret, because it can get you all killed.
Right.
So very right.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to be old enough to understand what a secret is. Yeah. I mean, I just like this is I'm having a baby and I have a little son and he's 3, and I said to him, okay, in the very beginning, I said, we're just gonna be a secret. We're just us, and they said he doesn't 3 years old, he doesn't know secrets. So the first thing he gets to nursery school, the first thing he says to his teacher is, oh, there's a baby in mommy's belly. So yeah.
That's not a practical expectation.
No, and I said to my husband, my husband, I said, I don't think he really knows what a secret is, or just between us, what that means. It's like, well, my teachers, they're my special people, so.
I mean, but it makes me think about, like, religiously, experientially, for people who need to keep a secret, at what point is, the revealing of the secret is almost like it's a bit of a letdown, right? Because you're done, then you've revealed the secret, and so much, to what extent is the religiosity of people who have a secret religion keeping it secret?
Yeah.
And it's a
Right. Or those practices with like having the altar, how much does that, I think that was Samuel's question, how in the beginning, like how much does that become part of their own way of being crypto-Jewish? Yeah.
I mean, it's, in the Esther story, I'll open this up to the class. I mean, Esther's story, why do you think Mordecai tells her to keep it quiet, keep it secret that she's Jewish? It's not, right? It wasn't as though Mordecai kept his Judaism secret, right? He was very openly, he was Mordecai Yehudi. What do you guys think? What have you heard any good explanations for it? Yeah, Shira, what do you?
Well, they knew that, like the ministry and the king, they knew that there were Jews living in their kingdom. So not necessarily did Mordecai have to stay secret, but somebody like Esther, who was in a position of power and in the palace, I think that would very much influence the king's view on the Jews. If he knew that she was Jewish, then he would see her much differently and see the Jews much differently. But for everybody else to do, they were just considered like secondary citizens, like second-class citizens. So it made a bigger difference between like an ordinary citizen and somebody like in the palace.
So purely strategic, right? Dina?
So I just thought about this, but maybe Mordecai kept her like hidden, kind of, like from like society, like didn't really portray much of what she was to him. It was already too late. Society already knew about Mordecai and like knew that he was Jewish and that he was like the Jewish leader at the time. So maybe maybe that was why he told her to keep it secret. Like, society doesn't really know that you're Jewish. Society doesn't know your relationship to me. So when you go into the castle, just make sure that you keep it down low, that you don't know who I am. You don't know, they don't know that I'm related to you. So like, maybe there's something like that.
Anyone else? Any other ideas? Yeah, it's a little bit at the beginning of the story, a little bit unclear why he's doing it. Clearly there's a plan. I think that's part of the nature of the story.
Yeah.
And that, I guess, is the difference between a very elaborately, concocted story, or, kind of very elaborately developed story that's has beginning, middle, and end, and there's a resolution, it's a happy ending. And then people who have to live their lives with complete unknowing of what's going to be next, right? If you're living under the Inquisition, you don't know when you're going to be able to get out. You don't know how you're going to if you're going to get caught or not. And so it's very different. Yeah, some more hands. Yeah, Shauna.
I'm thinking maybe it was to protect Esther, because I remember learning that Ahasuerus actually hated Jews even more than Haman did. And that's part of why Haman was successful in getting his plan to get laws passed to destroy everyone. So maybe he wanted to make sure that Esther didn't reveal her Jewish identity until she had found favor in Ahasuerus' eyes.
Interesting. Right. So then she leverages that personal and turns it into something more. Yeah. Can you guys think of other parallels with the society that we're talking about, with the Converso society, people living under Inquisition and things like that? Can you think of stuff? Think of parallels between the Esther story and their life? Yeah, Kayla. Yeah.
Maybe there's a lot of assimilation going on, just because, Converso's converting, and then in the Esther story, everyone was going to the king's party and drinking and really just,
Right. It's interesting. The Chachamim, right, when they read the scene of the party, right, that's not in shots, right, but when they read the scene of the party, and it even makes it into the way it's read in the Megillah, right, Kelim Mikelim Shonim, that switches into the Tisha B'Av keynote trup, right, to signify that there's something going on here, right? They Chachamim read the party as what's so bad about the party? Well, it's because Jews go and they participate in this big debauched thing, and they're so clearly losing themselves in exile, right? So there's a great anxiety throughout about that. Yeah, there's some more hands. Let me see. Yeah, Shira. Mm-hmm.
So I just learned something about the Megillah that I never knew before, that it was the only book in Tanakh that was written from the lens of the non-Jewish world looking over the writer's shoulders, because it was written in the diaspora. And I think somewhere in the Gemara or the Medrash, it says that Chazal said that we can't write this down, and Esther says, no, you have to write this down. So when they wrote it down, you can read it through a Christian lens, and you can read it through a Jewish lens. And if you're reading it through a Jewish lens, you know that there's little points that only a Jewish reader can pick up on versus a Christian reader, because as this speaker was saying, that it was written through a knowledge of non-Jews looking at it. So I think that's a strong connection between all the Inquisition books and stories, and we talked a lot about people's confessions and story of their lives, how maybe they were saying it, but it was written through a Christian lens, and the writers were definitely leaving things out and putting things in, because they were, yeah.
Right, kind of speaking on different registers, right? Kind of for different audiences, which is essential to so many of so much of the literature that you analyze in your book, Emily, right? That's going on all the time, or at least you bring that consciousness, I think.
Yes, no, and I think in the poem that I look at, it was written in Amsterdam, was written by a Portuguese Jew who returned to, very openly practicing Orthodoxy, and he never had that in Portugal previously. So there are, and they kind of chose what ways to live. And I was just going to add too, for this Carvajal family, one of the, the family members were divided. Most were crypto-Jewish and really were adamant about their faith. But there was a brother who became a priest on purpose. The family really supported him becoming a Catholic priest as a way of showing their like that they were, you know, good Spanish citizens at the time, and kind of having other people look away from the practices of the rest of the family. The uncle who brought the whole family to the New World, he was never a crypto Judaizer. And they weren't supposed to, you know, crypto Jews weren't supposed to make it to the New World. They were officially outlawed. Anybody with a converso background, but because of the family connections, they were able to come. So it did very much mix within the families as well.
Emily, what did Esther mean to the Christians? Why would they have her? Why would they have those tapestries out for Holy Week? And like, what did that mean for them? What did they see her as? Touched on it, but there's like, can you explain a little bit better? Yeah, it was a little more.
Sure. I think, and there was tapestries. There was also these one-act plays that were created. There were things that happened by a Christian perspective in Spain at that time. And the story, in most of the stories, what they have in common is not there was an acknowledgement of Esther as a heroine, but most of the acknowledgement about her as a heroine was that she was a good, virtuous woman, and she upheld a lot of the norms expected of women at the times. And women were, she was, she did what she was supposed to do. She wasn't like Vashti, and she listened to the king. And then the story overall really celebrates empire, and the king is the central figure. The Spanish Empire is having power, and kind of showing the wealth, and I think the parallels between the Persian Empire and the Spanish Empire at the same time. Of look at this this situation that we've created for ourselves. We're really strong, and you have to get in line if you want to be part of it. And so the story was used, and it was used frequently as a way of kind of celebrating that strength in empire, but also these values of what a woman should be at that period. And there's a lot written about women and how they should act and how they shouldn't act, and yeah.
Fascinating. Yeah. Well, certainly the figure of Isabel, I loved how you made that comparison. Also, she was very beautiful, and that was something that was talked about also at the time. Not only was she was very pious at the same,
Yes.
She was a very complex personality and played on all those different strengths. I mean, she was clearly a very powerful, savvy politician as well, but played on piety and also beauty and right.
Yeah, because she was a mother, so she wasn't a virgin in the same way that the Virgin Mary. Well, the Virgin Mary was a mother, but she was celebrated because she was her husband was kind of a womanizer and had lots of stuff, but she was this good example of mother of the nation. Yeah, and Isabel, I think Isabel played a huge role. The Virgin Mary at the same time played a huge role as this mother figure. And of course Esther, there's no mention of children, so she's not. And for like Isabel de Carvajal, she was never a mother; she was a widow. But Leonor de Carvajal was. But Isabel became this teacher for all the other kids in the family. So there are these different levels of how they kind of relate to each other.
Yeah, I want. It's a the rabbis have a recommendation that after Purim you start studying the laws of Pesach, of Passover, and so I wanted to make a little connection to Passover from this story, which is that there's an amazing documentary done about a group of crypto Jews who kept on to their Judaism in the mountains of Portugal in the north. Frederick Brenner, the great photographer. It's called The Last Marranos, and it's done in the early 80s, late 70s, early 80s. And he's talking to an older woman in this community. This is a community that, for a very long time really maintained an oral tradition about what they believed, kept everything very secret. Even after the dismantling of the Inquisition, they were very scared. They lived in a very small, very conservative village in the north, and their neighbors were not so happy with the idea of these people being, heretics among them. And the woman at some point says, there was this old woman that they interviewed, she explained their history. She said that they are in Egypt and that Saint Esther is going to come and take them out of Egypt. So she conflated, really just seamlessly like collapses the biblical story of leaving Egypt with the Esther figure as this kind of messianic leader figure, and of course that community, in its secret form, was very much run by the women. So it makes sense that the hero that they imagine taking them out is going to be, it's not going to be a male Messiah, it's going to be a female Messiah. It's going to be Saint Esther, which is just, it's an amazing moment in the movie. The movie itself is a gem. It's so beautifully done and poignant, but I remember seeing that years ago, just, so.
Yeah, no, and I think that, the fast of Esther for the Carvajal women and for the other, the Belmonte community you're mentioning, and the Mallorcan community, and throughout Latin America and Peru, they do say that the fast of Esther is one of the most important, most sacred holy days for them. It kind of replaces other things that were, today or in other communities would be more important as high holy days. That's really fascinating. I didn't know that particular.
Yeah, I might have garbled it even more, so it's my own broken telephone. But we should check out the film.
Yeah.
Guys, any other questions before we wrap up? Well, I want to really thank you again, Emily. This has been really, really fascinating, and I think it's enriched a lot our understanding of some of these questions, these bigger questions. And it's, I look forward to seeing your new work, and like I said, you can find Emily's piece here, and along with many others, and it's really just been a pleasure. I want to tell my class, if you just stay on for 5 minutes, I want to just talk about the project, but I really, really thank you, and I look forward to hosting you in person on campus. We can have some Hamantaschen next time. So that.
I know. I actually said to my husband, I need Hamantaschen soon.
You have to find out where in Rhode Island.
He's going to make them.
He's going to make. That's the best.
Yeah. He'll teach your class. Thank you all. Thank you all very much, and thank you, Ronnie, for inviting me. And thanks to my students. And please, if you have questions later that you might not have wanted to ask in a big group, I'm really happy to answer them as well. And so thanks for having me. It's been great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.